In January 1945, Germany's famous dictator Hitler and his top commanders settled in an underground bunker in Berlin. From here on, he would direct the course of the war. This was the beginning of the end. The final stop had been reached, but none of them were like this. So, what did Hitler and his staff experience in their last days in this bunker beneath Berlin? In this section, we will focus on this. We will learn what happened not only to Hitler, but also to those around him. Now it is time to dive into the depths of the bunker where Hitler spent his last days, namely the Führerbunker, and see what we will witness in this damp and depressing atmosphere. In fact, Hitler lived in many different headquarters throughout his rule. He did not stay in the places he stayed for very long. The capital was no longer safe with the Ray chancellors, whose official residence was in Berlin. Hitler had 20 different headquarters outside Berlin. Among these, the ones he suffered the most were Bergova, located within the borders of Bavaria, and Wolfschanze or Curtini, especially in the final stages of the war. In the second half of 1944, he spent most of his time in the Alder Horsa or Eagle's Nest, within the state borders of Hesse. He commanded the war from here. However, when the Ardennes offensive and Operation Nordwind failed, he left with his commanders and returned to Berlin on January 16, 1945. Ray could have settled in his apartment on the upper floor of the Chancellery. However, instead of doing this, he chose to settle in the Führerbunker, a massive bunker consisting of offices, tunnels, and storage areas built approximately 10 meters below the Chancellery Garden. Hitler had 30 personnel accompanying him as he descended the stairs of the old bunker and passed by the blast-resistant steel doors. And probably none of them guessed that this place would be Hitler's last stop. The first phase of the bunker, originally built to protect against air raids, the war bunker, was much smaller and was built in 1936 during the Berlin Summer Olympics. As the war progressed, it was decided to expand this section. This new section, called the Führerbunker, had stairs and a reinforced steel door. The bunker's roof was approximately 3 meters thick. Inside, there were 30 rooms arranged around a long corridor. Some of these rooms were specially designed for Hitler and Eva Braun. These included a living room, a study, 2 separate bedrooms, a map room, a briefing room, and a waiting room. Communication with the outside world was provided by a private telephone switchboard, a telex machine, a military radio connected to a surface antenna, and personal couriers. During his first days in the bunker, Hitler ate only meals and slept. In the afternoons, he attended meetings with senior commanders in the Chancellery building. The news was generally bad. By February 2nd, the Soviet Union had reached the Oder River, only 70 kilometers from Berlin. German forces in Budapest had surrendered to the Allies. The city of Dresden had been bombed and destroyed by the British Royal Air Force. By March, Hitler ordered an operation against Hungary to protect the region's oil fields. However, this operation turned into a complete fiasco. While this was happening in the east, the United States, under the command of Allied General John Leonard, was in the west. The 9th Armored Division was crossing the Rhine. Trapped in the midst of all this, Hitler's physical and mental health was naturally not very good. Chief of the General Staff Hees Ginn would say the following about those days. The left side of his body was shaking. He walked in an odd and clumsy manner, leaning more than usual. His movements were slow. When he wanted to sit, someone had to push a chair behind him. During this period, Hitler's outbursts of anger and shouting increased. His health was not very good either. As part of the treatment administered by Theodor Morell, he was taking substances, some of which had a narcotic effect. Hitler became increasingly dependent on these drugs, so much so that he was receiving nearly 20 injections a day. Although he claimed to feel fit after taking them, he was actually losing his ability to reason. From March on, Berlin was bombed almost daily. From this point on, Hitler began holding meetings, previously held in the Chancellery building in the bunker. He now spent almost all of his day in the Führerbunker. His connection with the outside world had diminished to almost nothing. His only news sources were visitors and the telephone switchboard inside the bunker. Life here was safer than up there, but it was equally brutal. The bunker was built below the water level. Dampness had become a major problem, and water was constantly dripping from the ceiling. The whole place smelled bad, and the humid environment became unbearable. The hum of the generators used to generate electricity also caused headaches for most of the personnel. Both this environment and Dr. Morell's treatment began to dull Hitler's judgment day by day. He had never been a truly competent leader, but now he ignored most of his commanders, scolded high-ranking officials, and even accused them of treason. For example, when Chief of the General Staff Hees Gin suggested the evacuation of 200,000 soldiers trapped in Latvia, Hitler angrily scolded him, but this was only the beginning. Hitler's madness was progressing day by day. Nero's decree, which came into effect in March, showed that things were getting out of hand. Hitler was now saying, "Let Germany burn." Nero's decree prohibited all military, transportation, and communication systems located on German soil that could be used by the enemy. It ordered the destruction of military vehicles, industrial facilities, and supply depots. Albert S.P., Minister of Arms Production, was tasked with carrying out the decree. However, SP began to ignore Hitler's orders from this point on and did not carry out the demolition order. Hitler's time in the bunker severed his connection with the outside world to such an extent that Spin would learn a month and a half later when Spin confessed to him that his orders had not been carried out. The death of U.S. President Roosevelt in April had given Hitler and those around him hope for a way out. Perhaps the course of the war could be reversed, but just a day later, the Red Army's entry into Vienna dashed these hopes. Contrary to the Nazis' expectations, no rift had formed within the Allies, and Roosevelt was replaced by Harry Truman. The war was in full swing, and within a few days, the Russian army would cross the Oder River and begin advancing on Berlin. On April 20th, Hitler left the bunker for the last time to celebrate his 56th birthday. He awarded some young Hitler Youth members the Iron Cross for their bravery against Russian tanks. That same afternoon, he held a military briefing in Nazi Germany. Hermann Ging, Henry Haller, Joseph Goebbels, Albert Speer, Rudolf von Ribbentrop, and Martin Bormann were among the participants of this final meeting. Many recommended abandoning Berlin. Thus, the war could be managed from the outside, but Hitler categorically rejected this and declared his intention to remain. When the meeting concluded, most of the participants hastily abandoned Berlin, which was being surrounded. It seemed Hitler was now facing his fate. Things continued to deteriorate in the bunker. Hitler had almost completely lost touch with reality. He had recently believed his army to be far more powerful than it actually was. He completely ignored any opinions that contradicted this. One of his commanders, Felix Steiner, had ordered the destruction of Soviet troops stationed in the north of the city, but Steiner never took action. In the briefing room, meters below ground, Hitler was moving non-existent divisions and armies around the map, demanding that the orders be conveyed to the relevant authorities. On April 22nd, when Steiner learned that his order had not been carried out, he went berserk, blaming everyone but himself for the war's cessation, blaming his generals and harboring resentment towards everyone close to him. He was spewing hatred. This crisis lasted about 3 hours and finally subsided. He admitted to those around him for the first time that the war was lost and announced his suicide. Hitler had lost communication with many points outside Berlin. Even within the city, his influence was beginning to wane. On April 23rd, Hermann Ging sent a telegram stating that if he did not receive any news from Hitler by 10 hours that night, he would be forced to take over. Hitler considered this a challenge and ordered Ging to withdraw from all his duties. Another development on April 23rd was Hitler's appointment of General Weidling to defend Berlin. Weidling suddenly found himself at the head of 80,000 people trapped within the city's borders. Many of them were members of the People's Storm Militia, created by Hitler, and members of the Hitler Youth. Life in the bunker became even more difficult as the fighting in the city intensified. Blood was shed above. Berlin was turning into ruins, but those below continued to watch. Furthermore, the fact that Goebbels' wife and 6 children had settled in the bunker caused a space problem. On the night of April 27th, Hitler and his friends were together. While listening to the BBC, Henry learned that Himmler had begun peace talks with the Allies. This was very heavy news for him, as Himmler was one of Hitler's most trusted commanders, so much so that he nicknamed himself Loyal Henry. When Hitler heard the news, he experienced one of his now common outbursts of anger and ordered Himmler's arrest for trial for treason. While this was happening upstairs, the war had intensified considerably. The German divisions had put up an unexpected resistance for a while. But no matter what, the inevitable end was about to come. The final curtain had been drawn up, and Hitler was aware of it. On the morning of April 29th, he married Eva Braun, his lover of nearly 10 years. The modest wedding ceremony was held in the map room. After the wedding breakfast, Hitler dictated his will. Accordingly, Grand Admiral K.L. Donat was declared his successor. He also appointed Joseph Goebbels as Chancellor. Dr. Stumm and Gerdon first tested the cyanide pills on his dog Blondu. The poison was highly effective, and the dog breathed its last in mere seconds. A day later, Hitler, General Wading, announced that the ammunition was completely exhausted and the city could no longer be defended. He learned that it was impossible. After this, Hitler's final order was to allow everyone else to escape the city. He said his goodbyes in the bunker and retired to his private study with his wife Eva. At 1:30 a.m., they saw Hitler collapsed on the sofa. Eva had taken cyanide, while Adolf had shot himself in the head. After that, their bodies were carried to the garden, where they were set on fire. Hitler didn't want his body to be used for propaganda purposes by the Allies. Therefore, he ordered it to be burned. This marked the end of one of the bloodiest periods in history. However, Hitler's death was followed by a series of escape attempts, murders, and suicides. Nazi Germany's generals Wilhelm Burgdorf and Hans, following in the footsteps of the KBS leaders, committed suicide. Hitler's aide-de-camp Heinz Linge and SS adjutant Ott Günch were captured by the Red Army while trying to escape. High-ranking staff and administrators such as Stun Fager-Bormann, Hans Bauer, and Arthur Axmann were among those captured while trying to escape. The most tragic end of all was experienced by the Goebbels family. Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda were among Hitler's most ardent followers of Nazism. A world without her would be a livable world for neither them nor their children. She killed her husband with poison and ended her life by being shot in the garden. Just like Hitler, he ordered her body to be burned, but because there was not enough gasoline left, the bodies could not be completely destroyed. Nazi Germany was no more. Everything was about to end. The deep wounds it had inflicted on the world were perhaps at a level that could never be repaired. Don't forget to like the video and share your valuable opinions in the comments. I'm Owl of Ages. See you in the next video. Goodbye.